Hi, welcome to my build of a 60-inch wingspan Das Ugly Stik. I've got to the stage now where I've got the fuselage more or less complete, except for this top sheeting, which I can't do until I've got the control linkages in, or don't want to do. I've got the tailplane and the fin completed. The fin still needs a little bit of profiling, as does the rudder and the elevator. But my next job is to get these glued in place, which hopefully should be a fairly straightforward process. The main concerns are making sure that they're vertical and this is lined up with the fuselage. Now, to do that, I will be taking measurements. I've got a piece of wire here just with a hook on the end, and I'll be hooking that into a fixed point at the beginning, towards the front of the fuselage, and I shall be measuring to a set point. So probably this tip here, I'll then move that across to the other side and measure to that tip there. Probably that's how I'll do it, I think, because that will give me a good reference point. And I also need to make sure that the tailplane itself is actually in the centre, which I don't think it is at the moment. I need to just need to move it slightly. But it's important to get that square in relation to the fuselage itself. Once I've got the tailplane in place and the fin, I can then start to think about the linkages, where the holes are going to go here for the control sleeves to come out, because I'm going to use a wire control linkage with just a piece of PVC sleeving. It will allow a little bit of bending, but not a great deal. If I put too much bend in, then it starts to get really stiff. But it is a little bit flexible, which is nice. On the elevator here, once I've worked out the exact location of the control horn, as with the aileron here, I will put in a piece of hardwood, piece of plywood. I'll epoxy that in, and it will just give me a much firmer mount. So, and then the very final thing, I will be putting on this top piece of sheeting, trimming it to size and gluing that into place. Obviously butting up to the trailing edge of the wings here. I think that's probably all I will do in this video. I may move on to the fuel tank and the linkages up at the front, but I think that will probably have to wait for another video. I just don't want to make these too long if I can help it. What I might actually do is glue the tailplane in place, sort out the linkage for that, and then glue this in place. Just depends. This may be in the way if I want to start putting holes in the side of the fuselage here, so it may just be easier. I'm going to epoxy these into place, and I may probably just put a little bit of square or small triangular stock here just to make sure that that's held really nice and firm. And I've got a couple of my trusty steel cubes in here just to hold the fuselage in place, nice and solid, not going to slide around while I'm trying to line this up. So I'll get on with this now, and we'll come back in a bit and we'll see how that's looking. Well, I've now got the tailplane epoxied in place, and that's just setting. I'm using the Zap 30-minute epoxy, which I find really good. It gives you that little bit of extra time to work with than compared to 5 minutes. And it's that little bit stronger, but it doesn't take forever like 24, so I quite like that. I've got the weights on to hold it all in place, and this now tailplane should be completely in line with the bottom of the fuselage, which is completely flat. Before I weighted this, I actually pinned these tails of the fuselage sides in place and got the right spacing using the tailplane, the fin. I found that if I didn't pin them and I just put the weight on, then they just started to spread a little bit. So I've got that all in place now, and once that's dry, I think I'll be looking at the control linkages. I've now got the tailplane epoxied on, and I've put in just a little couple of pieces of bracing either side, just to give it a slightly more surface area. I've also put in one of the control lines for the elevator. You can see I've epoxied and sanded a bit of plywood there, the same thickness as the elevator, just to give that a better purchase, so I'll screw that into there when I'm ready. It still needs a little bit of sanding, as does the elevator, just to finish off the control surfaces. But this linkage now, I've got this wire that runs through this 2mm plastic tubing, and this tubing here, I've epoxied it into the frame. That is below the surface of the fuselage, but only just, and I just used my razor saw and just cut out an angled slot there and epoxied that in. I wrapped a little bit of masking tape, just ordinary decorators type masking tape, artist masking tape, around that, just to give it a better hold on the epoxy and the wood. And the other end of this plastic is just in the bay with the servos at the moment, but I lined everything up so it'll be a nice, sweet, smooth linkage. So I've got that done now for the tail plane, and the next step is to, I think, is to glue in place the fin, and just make sure that is perfectly vertical. And then once I've got that in place, I can then do the same thing as I've done here and work out where the linkage is coming out and going to connect into the rudder. I think it will probably need to come out at the top of the fuselage as opposed to the side, and actually that's what's shown on the plans. I've just glued the fin into place, and I thought I would show you how I've held that to make sure it's vertical, because I had a little bit of head scratching as the best way to secure it. So what I've done is I've used my trusty steel blocks and put a couple on the tailplane just to hold that nice and flat, and another one in the fuselage, just again to hold that nice and secure. And then I put these bigger blocks in, so they're square on the fin, and I've just used my right angle square just to make sure and to eye that up and to make sure that is exactly vertical, and these blocks are holding it in place. It's just simple. I thought about trying to pin it or have a stay because it kept leaning over a little bit, and it'd be very easy to glue it, walk away and then find it's gone over a few degrees. So this has held it lovely and solid, so I'm really pleased about that. Ready to take these blocks off now. It's still curing a little bit, but it's more or less there now. It's hard. I'm going to put in the control rod now for the rudder, which also goes to the front for the steering wheel. I've been pondering this a while, scratching my head, and I think the best combination for me is going to be to attach the rudder on the same side as I've got. Let me just get rid of these. On the same side as I've got the elevator control. It's kind of a bit unconventional, I suppose, when you see most planes, they've got the control arms or the control horns on different sides. So conventionally you'd see it on here, and I guess that's probably to balance it up, so you've got one control rod either side and you're not getting issues with weight distribution. I've kind of pondered that quite a bit, and I'm not really concerned about the weight distribution issue. And actually the servos I'm mounting onto the left side of the fuselage as well. So you're going to have the servos, you're going to have all the control linkages that side to the left of the centre line. And the reason I'm not too concerned is that the engine on the front is at a 45-degree angle, as on the plans, and so there's a big chunk of metal which includes the cylinder head and the silencer muffler, which is going to be over on the right side. So I think a little bit of weight on this side is going to perhaps help balance that up, and I will see how it's how it balances when I've got it all together. And I may put the battery on this side as well, which is going in the front compartment. You can't see at the moment. So it's just that if I put the rudder control here, I can then connect to this side of the servo arm, and then I can have another connection on this side which goes straight through to the steering wheel, and they need to be on opposite sides really, because it just makes it easier and allows more control, because you've only got 4 holes on the servo horn or control arm, and if you want to just alter that and you've got 2 linkages in on the one side, it's going to limit you a little bit. So I'm going to get on and do that. Well, I've now got the control linkages in for the rudder and the elevator, and we'll just have a quick look at that before I put the final bit of sheeting on. So we can see here the controls come down to the elevator and the rudder. They still need finishing off. This one still needs a bit of plywood in there as a support. But these are well clear of each other, so they won't cause any problems in contacting each other. And the elevator comes out the side, and the rudder is going to come out of the top of the fuselage. I'm going to put that on in a minute, and once this is glued in place, I'll use epoxy here, so that can be sanded smooth. And what I'll do is I will cut this off flush, just the same as I've done there, so there'll just be an elongated hole sticking out the top of the fuselage with the control rod, the 2mm control rod coming out. If you just have a quick look inside, these, as I said before, these 2mm control rods are in polyethylene sheets, 2mm diameter inside or just over, and they're about 4mm on the outside. And I've run those up through these central holes. I've actually braced them at a couple of locations on the cross formers. I've just put a piece of wood in, and I've just made sure that's in the right location to line up with the servos, and then I've just used some cyanoacrylate, just some instant super glue, and I've also done that there. And I mean, these now, there's a little bit of movement in them still, but I've put masking tape around, and I'm just going to epoxy around there, so they will be nice and firm. As far as the linkages, I've lined up the wire with the centre of the 3rd hole out on this arm. So 1, 2, 3, 4. That will give me a little bit of leeway if I need to. I can always bend the wire and move it out, or move it in a little bit. But I think 3 is quite a good place to be. That's where I've been before on other builds, and the same with this one here. I'll put Z-bends here. I'll bend that and step that down into there, and then that leaves me this control arm here on this side, which will go up to the front for the steering wheel, or the steerable wheel on the front. So what I'm now going to do is I'm going to glue this on, but I just thought we'd have a quick look inside and see see how that was going to look. What I need to do before I glue this on is just cut this to size, so I need to put the wings on and make sure that's okay, so it doesn't it butts up right up against the trailing edge of the wings. Well, I've now got all the linkages connected to the rudder and to the elevator, and I've got them coupled up to a servo tester, and you can see that's working quite nicely there. I'll just show you a close-up of that. I think it's really worth putting in the extra effort and time to locate these control linkages so that they run really smooth. I mean, as I've said before, this is 2mm steel running in a 2mm inside diameter plastic tube, and getting them nice and smooth I think is really good. It'll put less stress on the servos and you'll get much smoother operation of your control surfaces. So I think this part of the video is finished now, and it's probably, the time's running on a little bit, so I'm going to call this to a halt. The next stage is going to be moving on to the forward section, and I hope you'll join me with that.